And we are live now in YouTube as well. Welcome, Mr. Garry Tonon.
Going on?
Tervetuloa. How do you do?
I'm doing pretty good, man. You know, busy week. I came back to Jersey for a bit to check in on everything and visit some friends and family and stuff. So I've been bouncing around a little bit. Got to watch the fights last night. So I'm feeling pretty good.
If somebody hasn't already watched the UFC fights, close your ears right now. How did you like the main event?
Man, it was a big surprise to me, actually. I think to most people, their last fight was, I felt like Conor dominated so easily that it left me almost no room for thinking that Poirier was going to be able to beat him. But yeah, he turned things around. Got a good takedown off in the first round. Second round, he pinned him up against the fence and then started landing shots. And I just think it was McGregor has this thing that he does in all of his fights, which is great sometimes, but it can get you in a little bit of trouble. I think when you get caught in a bad spot is he stays very relaxed, like almost too relaxed. And like, I think, he took a couple shots and was like trying to play it off like it was no big deal and stay calm and that sort of thing. But there comes a certain point where after you get tagged 3 or 4 times, it's like, whoa, we got to kind of go into, I don't know if I want to say panic mode, but we got to do something, to make sure we're no longer taking those shots. And I just think he got a little too comfortable and pinned up against the fence. And that was that. So
You think everybody's like generally Conor McGregor is already figured out by the other top fighters in the world? Or was this just kind of a fluke, or is Poirier just that good and that he's clearly on another level or something like that? Or is it that people has found this poison and it's a little bit easier to win him at the moment than it was before?
It's possible that he's not at the top of his game at the moment because he hasn't been fighting in a while, but I wouldn't call what happened a fluke. I would say though that I still felt like McGregor controlled most of that fight. Like he was still landing most of the shots and he was dominating most, even in the clinch and things like that, most of the time, with the exception of the takedown and then at the last 20 seconds or so of the fight. So, I mean, I think that you play that fight out another 10 times, and I still would venture to guess that McGregor wins that fight more times than Poirier does. But I mean, it's fighting. That's the crazy part, man. Like, it's one of the hardest things, like, for me is like John will send me videotape to study of like different people. And like, sometimes it's like a knockout reel of like guys getting clipped with like elbows and kicks and stuff like that. And like, man, it doesn't take that much, to completely, turn a fight around. So you never know, man. But yeah, I mean, kudos to Dustin Poirier. I don't want to take anything away from his performance. I mean, he did what he needed to do and he beat him. So,
especially with the leg kicks, he really slowed Conor down with those leg kicks, and that I think that kind of made Conor reach a bit too much when he was trying to land his punches. So that gave Dustin kind of like enough time to clip him in the chin. So
yeah, he was doing well with that.
Kudos to Dustin for that. Let's jump into your MMA career, because it's much more interesting to talk about that with you than it is to talk about fights that already happened.
Sure.
What's your next move? You fought when it was like was it December, or when you had your last fight?
Early December was the last fight.
Yeah. So you have any plans on right now?
Yeah, so hopefully looking at a title fight coming up soon. I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't give it to me. I've done some interviews for them and stuff like that, where I was talking to Thon Lee and we were both on together. So I'm assuming that that's what they're going to be promoting next. I can't guarantee it. They've posted a bunch of stuff on their social media about it. So there's nothing set in stone, but I'm pretty sure that that's what's going to happen next. As far as when, I would say probably not like right away. I'm thinking it's going to be another few months yet, because what was I going to say? We just kind of like moved out to Puerto Rico and stuff, and it's kind of hard to get settled in with a training schedule there to get ready to have that serious of a fight. a lot of things change. It's a 5-round fight now. And, a lot of things changed for me because I moved and, I'm trying to get back in the rhythm of training, and I got to find a spot to train with a cage and stuff. So there's like a lot going on, but I'll be ready for that fight whenever it happens. But I'm pretty sure, we're going to see that in the early half of the year at some point.
All right. We'll be looking forward for that. But at the moment, your training is kind of focused on facing Tan Lee right now.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, this is such a big opportunity. The title is my first shot at a title. So I got to kind of put all my eggs in that basket. And, I know that there was a couple of guys asking me to do some jiu-jitsu shows and stuff like that. And I'm kind of like, we got to hold off on all that yet. Just focus on the MMA for now. And, maybe there'll be time for that in the future. I'm not saying that, I'm done with jiu-jitsu or anything. It's just the timing is not good right now. Right now, I just really got to focus on that event. And then we'll see what happens in the future. You never know though, man. Like, it was a year and a half from the fight that I had prior to the last one. So I had maybe a 3-year career roughly. And I had 5 of my fights in a year and a half. And then the 6th one didn't come till a year and a half later. So never know what's going to happen, especially with COVID related things. If something like that goes into the works and then I find out that I can't fight for X amount of time, then maybe I do another grappling show. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Does it kind of like make things a little bit easier for you training wise when you are not kind of like dependent on the constant fighting? You have other sources of income as well. So you don't, for your income, you don't have to fight constantly. Does that make it a little bit easier for you to be able to wait until the better opportunity comes for the fight?
Oh yeah. I mean, things have gotten progressively better for me over time. I started from not really, making anything in the sport to, having a bunch, like you just said, like a bunch of different streams of revenue, whether it be from instructional videos or, whether it be from fighting, grappling, sponsorships, all these different things. So it definitely makes it a lot easier to relax and know that I'm going to be taken care of, and I have food that I can eat and, a place to live and all these things. It's funny. Like I was just excited once I was able to like pretty much go to a restaurant and eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And I wanted this, and I no longer had to eat like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for like, 2 out of 3 meals a day. So, yeah, man, definitely makes it easier. I'm happy about where I'm at in my career right now, as far as those kind of things are concerned. I also, thankfully don't have a family to have to take care of or anything like that. So it's just me. So it's just pretty easy I'm pretty low maintenance myself. So.
No family yet, or that you know of?
That we know of, yeah.
Do you have your career kind of planned? Like how far along have you planned your career, or you just go by fight according to when we're talking about your MMA career?
I think it's always important to have a kind of a tiered goal structure. Like I think like with almost anything in life, you have to have some sort of goals that are well within reach in a short period of time, something that's like mid-range, and then something that's like long in the future. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't at least on some level look to the future. I think maybe some people spend too much time doing that and they worry so much about the future that they don't get things done in the present. But I think that, I have my short-term goals. Like obviously the short-term goal is to win this title. Probably like the next goal after that maybe is to get a second title in a different weight class. I have like a couple other, guys that I want to try to see if I can get fights with, like even for getting the titles. Like I'd love to have a fight with Shinya Aoki, because I think that number one, I think it'd be a really tough fight, whether people believe it or not. I know I beat him in a jiu-jitsu match, but it wasn't easy. And adding the striking component in, when Shinya's on, like it's a really tough fight. I'm out of any of the fights that I would potentially have at one, it's one of the ones that in some ways I least look forward to and most look forward to. So that's one that I'm interested in. They still have Sage Northcutt under contract too. So getting some sort of a fight together with him would be a cool thing too. The great opportunity. So there's a couple other guys. Also, just the other guy in my division that just lost the title. I'm sure at some point I'll have to fight Martin Wynn, and I'd love to do that because he's probably the most in one. I would say as far as guys that have accomplished things, he's probably done almost the most out of in the organization. Obviously, like you have guys like Demetrius Johnson, but I'm saying like within that organization, he's done the most. Like he's fought for 3 titles and he almost, he came very close to getting a 3rd title. So he's a very talented opponent. So I look forward to fighting him. And then as far as anything in the future past all of that, again, like my goal is to become one of the greatest mixed martial artists that there ever was. And to kind of bump up the level in MMA the same way that, kind of my team has done with jiu-jitsu. So I want to showcase some things that maybe people haven't really seen before in a different way of putting things together in MMA. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to showcase that and to try to become the best mixed martial artist that I can. So wherever my career takes me, that I think that makes the most sense. Like I just said, there's so many other challenges ahead of me within one, wherever my career takes me, after as I'm accomplishing these goals, I'm ready to do it. And I'm just going to keep taking step after step for the most part. So long as my body allows me to, I think there's certain limitations that, injuries and stuff like that might play a role somewhere down the line as well. So we'll see how it goes.
Right. Do you think that you're going to fight your whole MMA career in ONE FC, or do you aspire to make it to the UFC, or do you think that your home is going to be ONE FC until
here's what I'll say. I have, like I said, there's so many different things that I want to accomplish within one championship that's a far ahead kind of conversation. In my opinion, it's not something that I'm looking to do anytime soon. But I do think that at a certain point, there comes a point, and honestly, like it could even happen within the UFC as well. There kind of comes a point where you kind of fight everybody within the organization that makes sense to fight. Like, for example, like in like Khabib's instance, right? Like, it's like you kind of like already fought everybody that makes sense to fight. I think for the most part, I think there's who did everybody complain that he didn't fight yet? The guy from 10th Planet, right?
Ferguson.
Yeah, Ferguson. So everybody wants to see that. So maybe that fight makes sense. But like, other than that, I guess he's pretty much kind of gone through everybody. So there comes a certain point where you go like, all right, well, are we just going to like wait till another up and comer comes up through here? Are we going to retire, or are we going to go move to another organization and find other guys that I can't fight because they're not in my organization? I don't know. I'm not saying that I think Khabib's going to do that, but I'm just saying like there will come a certain point within an organization where it's like, okay, we've fought everybody that makes sense to fight. So unless they bring in other guys, then that's what makes sense in terms of, continuing to level up my career. So if that's the case, and I get to that point in my career and I stay healthy and I don't just get viciously knocked out like 3 fights in a row or anything like that, then yeah, maybe my career will take me, outside of one. But for the time being, I'm just focusing on the present and trying to be the best mixed martial artist that I can be. So
that's cool. And ONE FC is not a bad organization. It's clearly I think at the moment, as a prestige-wise, clearly the second biggest organization in the world. And what comes to the amount of viewers per fight, it might be even bigger than some of the UFC fights. Like, surely the fights in ONE FC are way bigger in audience-wise than majority of the UFC fights. Only the biggest pay-per-views goes over because of the ONE FC's televised kind of programs in Asia. So it's not a bad place to fight for professional fighter. There was a question that came beforehand about actually fighting Tan Lee, and the question is that Tan Lee has been training at 50-50. So will that be in effect when you fight him? Because he might be able to defend some of the leg locks. He's been training with Ryan Hall, who is also an excellent leg lock guy. So will that affect your game plan, or will that affect some kind of like an approach? Or you just think that leg locks in your game are way better than Ryan Hall, so you don't even have to consider that kind of an aspect?
Well, I do believe that, but but having said that, I don't think that'll change. I don't think it's going to change my game plan. It's something to factor in just thought process wise, but it's not like I haven't had fights where I've gone for leg locks and guys defended them. You know, it's not like every single time I get in on a submission hold, like it's just over. I don't think it's ever true for like really anybody realistically. I think that I never really as a fighter, I never want to throw all my eggs in one basket in the first place. And as a grappler, I never did that either. I've always had, well, at least towards the second half of my career, I always had like multiple ways of being able to submit people. And I've always taken an approach where, you know, when one thing doesn't work out, I kind of have other options. I think I rarely get tunnel vision to the point where I'm just trying to finish somebody in one specific way. I mean, even in my last fight, like I went for a leg lock entry, it didn't work out, you know, but we saw that for the most part, I was just able to dominate and control on the back. So I think like, even if he's working with Ryan and like there's certain things that he's going to be able to defend that I throw at him, or he's going to be more ready for, or whatever the case may be, it's not going to be the first time in a fight where I try to do a submission and somebody gets out or somebody repositions or whatever. Like, I think that no matter what's going on over there, more than likely, I'm always going to have an edge in the grappling department. It's just been something that I've been doing for, you know, I mean, it's almost 15 years now, probably. I can't see anybody that I ever fight is going to really have an edge there. You know, is it possible that somebody hits a move on me or defends? Of course. But yeah, man. So it doesn't really change my approach. It just, you know, it's just something to add in the back of my head. Like, okay, like he might be a little bit more well-versed at this than, you know, some other opponents or whatever the case may be. But I think that, you know, if he avoids leg lock danger, he's going to be in danger elsewhere. So I'm not too worried about it one way or the other. I have a lot of follow-up attacks, and I'm getting very confident in my abilities to handle myself in the standing position too. So it's not like that's going to be the game plan to like try to knock him out or anything like that. But I feel comfortable there. I mean, even in my last fight, I spent the entire third round probably standing and won most of the exchanges, I thought. So
in the beginning of your career, in your MMA career, I always thought like first 3-4 fights, how well did you plan what you're going to do and how you're going to stop the fight? Because in my eyes, they were kind of like prequels to John's DVDs that he was releasing or he just released. And you happen to have a fight that you just ended with a leg lock, or you just ended with the choke from the back, or you were doing something that was exactly from John's DVD that he already just published or just was going to publish. Was that intentional, or was it just something that kind of happened on a...
Not particularly. I mean, I took my first few fights, and the first thought process I had was, all right, well, I don't have an amateur career. I have to take this like seriously. It's not like it's still a fight, you know. You can still get like I was saying before, you know, there's all kinds of things that can happen. But I also don't want to get caught in the trap I think some people get caught in, especially jiu-jitsu guys. It could be anybody though, of I think like not getting used to the standing position and stuff like that. So in my first few fights, I pretty much, it wasn't until really the fifth fight where I said to myself like, oh, I'm just going to go in there and win. Like all the other fights, I kind of said like, okay, I want to spend some time in the standing position and feel what that's like and just get my experience there. So that it doesn't have to be the title fight with the first time I ever have to really feel out what it's like to stay in a standing position because somebody defends some takedown attempts, right? So that was my first thought going into all of those fights. As far as the actual finishes are concerned, like, man, I mean, some of them I TKO'd the guys in those fights. I wouldn't say I planned to TKO them. It was almost like it kind of in the context of the fight, when I felt what was working and what wasn't working, it felt like, man, controlling this guy and hitting them is working really well. So let's just finish the fight that way. And then, I know my second fight, I fought this big, tall Indian guy, and it got to the third round and I had tried to do some submissions on him and stuff like that. And it wasn't really working out. And I was like, all right, I really got to put this guy away. So when that happened, I was like, okay, what the best way that I'm going to be able to do that is to take his back, you know? So that's how that happened. And then the fourth fight, I think it was, I got cut, not badly, but I didn't know. I mean, you can't see your own face. So I got cut underneath the eye, and I don't know, I guess I just got nervous about it and thought like, oh, I was like worried that, you know, they might stop the fight or something, because I've seen that happen to people before. I think that was close to the same period of time where like I think it was Nate Diaz had a fight and he had like a cut on his eye, and then they stopped it, and you know, everybody was all frustrated. So I'm like, oh man, I don't want that to happen to me. You know, that's what a way to lose a fight, or to, you know, to have a no contest or whatever it is. Like, I don't want anything like that to happen. So, so I just went right. I as soon as I knew that happened, I went right out there and I was like, okay, I'm going to submit this guy. It just so happened that, you know, front headlock was the way that happened. Like, I don't know if he shot in or I shot in or how that worked, but I just felt like access to the head was the easiest thing. So I think that as far as the actual finishes themselves, it wasn't like pre-planned, but I did have some sense of like an idea of like what I wanted to do, you know, ahead of those fights. So.
John is also well known to be like a tactician in like a grappling and MMA community. How well do you guys plan your fights in advance, or does it just kind of like flow with the go moment, like Hickson would say?
When you say plan the fights, like you just mean like what we're gonna do in the fight?
Yeah.
Okay. So John has taken, I would say, the general approach for most of my career of just development, especially because, like I said, like, I mean, we were starting at age like 26 when I started, wasn't coming from a place of a lot of experience other than jiu-jitsu, obviously. So I think that his main concern was, hey, like, we got to get this guy ready to like stand in front of somebody while they're throwing punches at him. So I think he wasn't really too concerned with, oh, this opponent has a really strong overhand, or this opponent has a good high kick. Like those weren't really huge factors in our training. There are things that we probably dealt with on some level, but it was never like me and John sat down and had like these big conversations like, oh yeah, like, you know, you really got to watch out for this. So we're going to do that. And that in response to that, it wasn't like that. Like, I think most of the career was just spent like, all right, like we need to work on head movement today. We need to work on your distancing. We need to work on this. And it's all developmental stuff, not really getting me ready for specific fights, just getting me ready for fighting in general and developing skills. I think for the last fight, while we didn't necessarily have those extensive conversations, I do think that John like watched some tape, and I think that John, he's always a tricky guy. I didn't even ask him to say for sure whether or not this happened, but I could tell in some of the drills and stuff that we were doing that it was geared towards preparing me for this opponent. Like, I think like we did a lot of stuff with like a rear leg high kick and stuff, just to make sure that we were getting ready for that danger, because that was something that he often used. And I think that even though he didn't like have a conversation with me saying, hey, Garry, this guy's going to do this, and this, because we did those drills all the time in practice, that was his way of like preparing me. It's just, he didn't say, hey, your opponent's going to do this. That's what we did in practice, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, we have little conversations and stuff about what people are good at and things like, you know, me and him have talked a little bit about Thon Lee and how Thon pretty much, in most of the fights that I've watched anyway, always matches up in an open stance. So it doesn't matter what stance you take, whether it's southpaw or orthodox, he always stands so that it's an open stance. So he'll just switch his stance in accordance with yours. And of course, I'm sure it's intermittent points he might switch, but for the most part, that's what he's looking for. That's how he likes it. He likes to keep an open stance so he can land his rear hand and his rear kick, right? So these are just things we think about and we talk about, but I don't know how much like super game planning we do. Like, we're like, all right, well, when he goes to throw that rear leg kick, we're going to, you know what I mean? It's not, fight's still a fight, and there's still a lot of randomness. And I don't know. I haven't had an opponent yet where I really felt like John had to do stuff like that yet. Maybe as we get into this next fight camp, he'll react that way because it's the title fight now. I don't know, but most of it's all been development up until now.
Yeah. Do you even kind of believe in that kind of like scouting your opponents, or do you think it's more important that you focus on your aspects of fighting? Like you're gonna go and fight your fight, and the other guy is gonna fight his fight, or he has to kind of like adapt to your style in that fighting? What's kind of your personal approach to that, like pre-planning or kind of adapting to the fighting style of your opponent?
I think because we, so far ahead of time, you got like an 8-week window, so far ahead of time, exactly who your opponent is. It's not like ADCC where we have 16 guys who we're getting ready for. 15, I guess, not including yourself, but you have 15 guys you're trying to get ready for. And it's kind of like, all right, well, I guess I could do some research on these different guys. And it's a lot. You know what I mean? I mean, is it worthwhile? Like, I'm sure on some level it's worthwhile to research who's in the division, but it's also, I mean, kind of, it's going to be kind of difficult to game plan for 15 different people. So because you only have one person and you have such a long time, I think it's a little naive to not at least do some research. You're not going to spend like an hour or two watching some of their footage. I think it's kind of silly to not do that, just in case there's something that's glaringly obvious that this person does all the time that you can either catch them with, like maybe it's a mistake that they're making because, they got taken down doing this like 6 different times or something like that. Or, some big strike that they telegraph or something. I think it's silly to not at least do a little bit of research. I have changed my approach in this though. I don't really like to watch my opponents as I get too close to the fight anymore. And the reason that I don't like to do that is I think I get a little bit too inside my own head, thinking about like kind of what you said, like thinking about what they're going to do to me and worrying too much about that as opposed to what I'm going to do to them. And I don't think it's good. I think it starts to change your mindset to a more of a defensive mindset as opposed to a offensive mindset. And in fighting, a defensive mindset over time just leads to survival, which is cool from the aspect of like self-defense, I guess. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we're talking about winning fights and particularly having like exciting fights that people want to watch, having a defensive mindset might not be the greatest thing. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean that I want to stand in front of somebody and, trade punches for 5 rounds or anything like that. That's not what I mean. You can still be defensively responsible while being offensive. And that's what I really would like to look to do. So what I do now is I spend a decent amount of time way ahead of time, whether it's 8 weeks, 7 weeks, 6 weeks, maybe looking at all of my opponent's fights. And I'll spend some time watching them and paying attention to what they're doing. And then I'll have that in the back of my head. After that, I don't really watch anything that they do anymore. I don't want to see them doing anything, because then all I can imagine is me being on the receiving end of all the good shit that they're doing. And I just don't want I don't need that mental kind of lapse. I'd rather just think about how I'm going to dominate in these sorts of things. So I think it's good to do research. I think there's a point of overkill after a while if you just keep playing it and playing it and playing it,
Yeah. And I think for some people, it's clear that some people have been kind of like over-research their opponents.
Sure.
And you see them like trying to target your opponents like weak spots and be careful of like their good stuff. But they forget that the other guy has been training as well for like 8 weeks or like half a year or something like that.
Sure.
So they also have been developing a new stuff that they can use. So yeah, people kind of sometimes like overanalyze and then stick with this, like, okay, this is what he always does and this is how he always fights. And then when there's something kind of new happening, then it gets them off guard and stupid stuff happen when you get off.
One of the tough things about game planning for me too in MMA, not for jiu-jitsu, but in MMA is like, I am such a different fighter than anybody else is going to fight. that I can watch all the tape in the world of them fighting other people, but when they go to fight me, they fight me different, you know? And it makes it almost impossible sometimes to like really know what to expect when somebody comes out to fight me. Cause some guys like literally change their entire game plan. Like I fought this one Korean guy, and he most of his fights, like he just shoots for takedowns and like tries to grapple people. I don't think he tried once, like during our fight. Right. So it's like, he completely shifted everything that same thing with my last opponent. Like, I don't think my last opponent, most of his fights, he takes people down, and that's part of how he wins. He didn't try to do it once. So it changes a lot of the way that people are actually going to fight me. So I don't know. I don't know how helpful it is sometimes, you know, watching tape of them fighting other people. So
you're obviously one of the best grapplers in the world at the moment in your division. Do you think you fight 155 pounds, right?
So it's a little weird with one. Yeah. They're in
their 70 kilos, something like that, right?
Yeah. In their organization, it's 155, but it's like the equivalent of a 145 because their weigh-in structure is different. Anybody that's in that division would never fight 155 in the UFC. I wouldn't say never, but most likely not.
Mostly, yeah. But do you think in 155 in one FC or 145 generally, there's people that would concern you as a grappler, like people who would you feel that has maybe not upper hand in grappling, but would be kind of like a greater adversary for you in grappling department? Of course, there has to be tons of people who are better in stand-up, like strictly stand-up, because you've been doing that for such a short time. But is there anybody in those divisions who concerns you as a grappler?
I think Martin Wynn does a good job of mixing skills. So I don't think he would outmatch me in the grappling department or anything like that, but he could be like a cagey opponent that would be difficult to maybe submit. Similar thing with Thon. I haven't really got to actually see Thon move on the ground too much, but like you said, like he's doing a lot of training camps and things at 50-50. So you would imagine if he's just spending his time wisely there, that he probably has a good idea of what's going on. So I think it more comes down to, hey, it might be a little harder to use my best skill on these guys, but not necessarily that I'm going to feel like I'm ever going to be outmatched there. The only person that I think is really going to bring grappling skills to the table to contend with me in that organization, well, I guess within a reasonable weight class, because obviously now they have signed Buchecha and Yuri, so like, you know, they're both very high level grapplers. But I mean, let's be honest, I'm sorry guys, I'm not going to be fighting grappling, sure, Buchecha and Yuri, no problem, any day of the week. But fighting, I don't think so, not so much. I'm not signing up for the 260-pound weight class. So but anyway, other than anybody in a reasonable realm of my weight class, I would say Shinya would be the person that I think is most dangerous. And not that I think that I would necessarily get submitted by him, but I think he could do things with his grappling skills that would make fighting him very difficult. I think he does a really good job controlling people with body locks and things against the cage. He's got some really tricky things that he does. And he's a big, strong dude. I really underestimated him when I went into the first in our grappling match. He doesn't like really look that strong, athletic, etc. But he's definitely one of the stronger guys that I've ever grappled, like roughly around my weight class. So,
yeah. Do you approach your jiu-jitsu matches and your MMA fights differently? Because you're known to do a kind of like crazy, flamboyant stuff in the grappling matches, but do you think that you can do that, or do you do you even want to do or think of doing something like that, like in an MMA fight? Do you approach them differently? Is it mentally different for you to prepare for the jiu-jitsu or MMA?
I think so. I think there's a high degree of risk involved, a much higher degree of risk involved in fighting, and even more so because I'm less experienced. So it's like, it's something that I'm obviously less comfortable with than I am with grappling for multiple reasons. Again, one, because of experience, but two, just because of like the actual worst case scenarios of each sport. Like for the most part in grappling, like your worst case scenario is like, all right, I get strangled unconscious, or like, you know, even a broken limb, like, I mean, that shouldn't even be in the cards so long as I tap, right? So like for the most part, worst case scenario is I tap in front of, you know, friends and family. Okay, whatever, you know, no harm, no foul. I'm probably not going to get hurt as long as I'm not full of pride. You know what I mean? And I'm trying to like outlast and I let something break. Right. But in an MMA fight, I mean, man, like, getting knocked out, taking brain damage for 5 rounds, for 3 rounds, all these things, like, you know, the cost is very high, and the chances that those things are going to happen is much higher than in grappling too. Like, the likelihood that you're going to have a guy who's at a very high level in grappling meet a guy who's under his level, and have the guy that's under his level come out and submit him or do damage to him is probably much less than would ever exist in MMA. Like in MMA, I still think that somebody that's much less skilled, especially if they have like, let's say they're much less skilled, but they have like one punch or one kick that they are particularly very good at, and they know how to throw it with power. I mean, that's enough. We've seen it happen a ton of times. Guys like Dan Henderson and stuff just, you know, right over the top and crush like really guys that you would imagine would be more skilled than them. Right. So I definitely approach them differently. I get a much higher level of anxiety towards mixed martial arts as I'm going to approach it. As far as my style is concerned, I still try my best to be as defensively sound as I can, so that I can kind of take a little bit more risk and be a little bit more loose and have a little bit more of play and creativity in my style. I will say that even guys that even in MMA, guys that I often interact with that have been doing this for a while will come to me and be like, man, it's really interesting, like the way that you do this and the way that you move. And, you know, it's very unconventional. You switch stances a lot. It's not something that you see from a lot of people. And I credit John a bit for that. Not so much because he told me that that's what I should do, but he's given me, sometimes I think coaches, when they're coaching an athlete, the structure of the coaching is very rigid, and they say, okay, you have to do this and you cannot deviate from this rule that I just gave you. John more just kind of has principles that he teaches. It's more like, hey, you know, you can access, you know, these sets of punches here if you can get your head off to this angle or your body off to this angle. And, you know, when we were trying to hit the head, we're going to try to maybe, you know, feint towards the body first and then come back upstairs. It's like, they're rules that can be broken and like molded to different situations. It's very rare that John is teaching and he's just like, no, you absolutely have to do it this way, this combination, this. So because of that, I've been able to develop in a very unique style that's just very different than what a lot of people get. Because I think what most people, when they're trained, are very classically trained from one stance. They're hitting pads and, all right, your feet have to be this far apart and you're going to have to, you know, you do this and you step here. And I think it makes people a little bit more cookie cutter than the athlete that I became. And because of that, even though, like you had just said, like, all right, you know, I do a lot of exciting, like really weird things in grappling, I still think in MMA to a degree, like you see a little bit of that too. It's like, oh man, I haven't seen somebody move quite like this before. So I think people will still continue to see a lot of that. I think I have a lot of things that I do that are quite unique in MMA.
Yeah. You've been, sorry. You've been mentioning a couple of times about being defensively savvy or being defensively cautious.
Sure.
One of the questions we had like beforehand was also about your ability to defend yourself in horrible situations, like in fully locked arm bars, in bad positions. Do you consider those positions even being bad, or how do you approach to those situations? Kind of like the first time you came out to the world, like to the global grappling world, was the Kron Gracie fight in 2013 Abu Dhabi. And the craziest thing of that fight was that you were escaping kind of like the depths from the hell many times. Many times in that fight. Like Kron had you in a straight armbar, and he was like really going for that, and you kind of looked like you didn't even really care that he had your arm. Like,
yeah.
How did you develop that, and do you even consider them to be that bad of a position?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say that. So there's this relationship that starts to develop between risk and I guess repetition, maybe, where if you're doing something that's risky and you're recreating it and repeating it over and over and over again, maybe maybe when you're repeating it, it's in the gym and it's a little bit of a safer situation. It's a little bit more, I guess there's a little bit more padding on the walls per se, and as a figure of speech. It'd be like, if you were a trapeze artist or something like that, and then like, you kind of always have a net underneath you, but you're, flying through the air and you're doing all these, crazy things, and, but you practiced it a million times and like you've done it when the net's there, and it's like, okay, well now it's time to remove the net. That's no longer going to save you. But it's like, well, I've done this 1,000 times before. I'm very confident in this skill. Right. So similar thing, I think, in jiu-jitsu. And one of the cool things about jiu-jitsu is that you're able to replicate near 100% in your actual training comparative to the competing, right? Like where MMA, it's a little harder to do that. Like if you're replicating near 100% MMA fight, I mean, you're going home and possibly going to the hospital after you spar. And that's not exactly the most productive way to get better, I don't think. There's advantages to going near 100%, which, like I said, is great about jiu-jitsu. It's like, okay, this is going to be, I just made that relationship with the trapeze and the net underneath and all that sort of things. It's like, it's almost like we get to practice without the net underneath, like for the most part every single day. And we're the only thing that saves us by saying tap or whatever the case may be. And maybe having like a more controlled training partner that's not trying to kill you. Right. But, I think that a lot of that comes from putting yourself there a lot. One of the interesting things that happens in the grappling world is as you get better, you're in bad situations less. So if you don't practice them intentionally, like if you're not on purpose putting yourself in bad positions, when it happens in competition, which it's more likely to happen because of whether it's nerves or whether something unexpected happens, it's an opponent it's a person you've never grappled before, or it's just a higher level opponent than the guys that are in your gym, whatever the case may be. When that bad situation happens, you're not prepared for it because you haven't been repeating it. Right. So the risk seems like crazy high. And the other thing to talk about when it comes to risk is if the risk of something feels crazy high. So let's say, for example, I'm terrified that somebody's going to take my back. I'm terrified that somebody's going to take my arm. I'm terrified that I'm going to get triangled, whatever the case may be. And I'm not confident in my skills to get out. That makes my options for training, makes my options for competing so much smaller, because now I'm afraid to underhook you because I'm going to have an extended arm, or I'm afraid to, bridge and push you off from mount because my arm might get extended and now I might get armbarred, or maybe pass in a particular way that might expose my back or something like that. Right. So by getting very comfortable with that level of risk and knowing like, okay, like I've been in that bad situation before, I can get out, I can do these things. It makes it so that you can all of a sudden be this exciting fighter. Because if you were that exciting fighter and you didn't have those skills, you'd probably just get submitted all the time. I have a weird thing that I pride myself on that I think that it's probably strange. I don't think most jiu-jitsu guys would think that this makes sense. I think out of anybody in the sport that's any good anyway, I've probably got my back taken in fights, maybe not with both hooks in, but at the very least, like my back almost taken in fights more than almost any other athlete. And probably because I take like a lot of really big risks. But if you notice, very rarely does that end up in me getting strangled, out. In the rare instance where you're talking about with Kron, it happened. I think Gordon was another person that was able to submit me. He's a little bit bigger than me, not to make excuses, but just a little bit, also the best in the world. So it happens pretty rarely that I actually get submitted from that situation. And then contrast that with when most people in the world get their back taken in the martial art, it's over. Like it's not even a question, right? You see me playing all kinds of games. Guys get to rear body locks on me and I'm doing all these crazy rolls and stuff to get out. So back exposure is something that is seen as the death penalty in our sport. And it's a place that I live and breathe and love to be in a situation where somebody's trying to take my back, and I'll turn that around on somebody and put them in submission. I think even in the last ADCC, I got put in a rear body lock by JT and then threw him into a knee bar in the last 10 seconds of the match. Right. So I love dabbling in that place of let's try to eliminate as much of the risk as possible. You don't actually eliminate it, but by repeating that process, you start to feel more comfortable and it feels less risky. So in MMA, we took the same approach. John was like, hey, listen, you love to do these interesting, exciting, all these sorts of things in jiu-jitsu. The reason you can do it, you're very good at defense. So we're going to do the same thing in MMA. You're going to learn how to move your feet. You're going to learn how to move your head. You're going to learn the different types of guards and how to maintain distance and all these things. And you're going to learn how to deal with, catching kicks and all these things so that when those bad situations happen, those dangerous situations happen, you're ready. You feel confident that you're going to be able to defend yourself so you can push forward into that takedown. You can push forward into that rear hand and not feel like, you got to hold back because you're worried about something. That's something, honestly, speaking about the Dustin Poirier Conor fight. Yes, Dustin did a great job and everything like that. But one of the things, Dustin hits people pretty fucking hard. Like, if you watch some of his other fights, aside from the Conor fight, he tags people and they don't like it, right? He wasn't really able to do effective damage to Conor until he had him pinned up against the fence. I don't think he really, other than the leg kicks, right? And one of the reasons for that is every time he got anywhere near him, Conor was lighting him up with something, right? So he's getting hit. So now it's so hard for Dustin to step forward and be like, all right, well, I'm going to commit to this rear hand, right? How can you, if right after you throw it, if you miss, you're going to get left hook, uppercut, combination at your head. And it's going to be hard. Obviously Conor throws hard too. So it's one of those things. So if you're not confident that you're not going to get hurt doing what you're doing, it's so hard to act and everything suffers. If I want to take somebody down and I can't push forward into the takedown and I can't confidently move forward, it's going to be tough. How am I going to get to the person's legs, So
yeah.
I don't know. I try to take that approach in MMA too. It's just probably not quite where it is in jiu-jitsu. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah. And I think most of the the absolute best of the world has always been pretty comfortable in bad positions.
Sure.
Look at Fedor. He got clipped very hard in a couple of his fights, and he was really, you could see that he was not all there, but still he could kind of recoup himself, and then even after that win the fight. And same with George St. Pierre. He was in bad positions sometimes in his fights, but never kind of panicked there, and kind of just was able to kind of breathe in those bad spots, and kind of just continues. Same with Khabib. Anytime he's been in any kind of, I've never seen him be in a really, really bad position. But if somebody got at least any kind of grip of him, over grip, be an aggressor in his fight, he never seemed to be bothered by that. And I think that's a good winning mentality, to be able to be comfortable in the bad positions, and then after to have your offense based on that kind of comfort, that you can attack even though your opponent might be able to counterattack, and that you're still safe in those situations. We have lots and lots of questions from our viewers, but for some reason, a lot of them was about your sexual preferences and color of your dinner and whether you like boobs or ass and stuff like that. But
surprise. Don't know why anybody would ask any of those questions, considering I'm such a serious person who never talks about any of those things.
Also, a couple of people just wanted to write me and say that they want to thank you for introducing new Instagram pages for them to follow. So that's kind of like a public service that you've been doing, and people are appreciating that.
Everybody does community service in different ways, you know?
For sure. But let's not go to all those questions. I think boobs versus ass question, you can just go to Garry Tonon's Instagram page and you will see if he's an ass man or if he's a boob man. But there was also some good questions that are martial arts related.
Okay.
Just a moment in Finnish for a while. Pari viestiä on tullut, että ei ymmärrä mitä puhutaan. Yritetään laittaa näihin sitten jälkilähetykseen suomenkielinen tekstitys. Eli nyt puhutaan englanniksi, koska on Amerikan papla tuossa vieraana. Ja Instagramissa, niin tulkaa katsoa YouTubeen, niin näette myös Garryn lärvin. Okay. One of the good questions was asking about what's your kind of normal training routine? How do you train? How many times you train per week? How much of that is stand up? How much is grappling?
Sure.
And do you train a lot like just technique, or do you like kind of drill live much? And I think that was the positional sparring, and how much is free sparring, and
yeah,
and kind of like how is your training structured, and how much do you train per week?
Sure. So for years, I had a much heavier training load than I have at the moment. I would say for most of my career, I was doing 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 jiu-jitsu sessions a day. That was just for jiu-jitsu, obviously. This is before my MMA career. And then people would say, oh man, how do you do that? You know, like, how are you able to do all those sessions? And like, one of the things that I talked about, we just spoke about with the last question is like, I'm very comfortable just being in bad spots. Like, and I don't even mean that from a perspective of like, hey, I'm good. I mean like when somebody passes my guard, it's not going to ruin my day. It's not like somebody just shitting my cereal. Like, it's literally like, okay, like you passed my guard and now we're going to continue from here. And we work out. And for some people, like getting their guard passed in a training session, like high level athletes anyway, obviously, you know, if you're a hobbyist or something, I'm sure that happens every day and it's probably not that big of a deal, but you know, for some high level athletes to have their guard passed or to like get their back taken in a training session is, they lose their goddamn mind. You know, it's like I've had guys like that. I took their back during training sessions. I'm not going to name names. I don't want to be rude here, try to call anybody out, but you know, high level athletes that are no longer on the team that I took their back, and then like after I submitted them, you know, we got back up and they looked like they were foaming at the mouth and their eyes were all red and bloodshot, like all angry, like that this happened. And it's like, you know, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I never got angry during a sparring session for any reason, but I just think that some people take their training as if it's like a fight every day, you know, and every training session is not like that for me. Most of my training sessions are purely experimental. I'm trying to do this new move that was just taught to me, or, you know, trying to work some other thing into my game that's not there, or whatever the case may be. And, you know, along the way, if I get my guard passed or I get some, whatever, you know, I mean, that's in pursuit of trying to get better at this thing. So the thought process is kind of always like trying to get better. Of course, there's going to be rounds that I have that are competitive. Of course, you know, as I get closer to competition, like maybe I start changing my mentality a little bit, getting a little bit more serious, and just kind of mentally, you know, tuning into how I'm going to go compete. Right. But I think that the secret to being able to do large amounts of training sessions throughout a day and not like getting hurt or, you know, too exhausted or whatever the case may be is just moderation, like learning how to moderate the training a little bit, and not make every training session a death training session. Then, yeah, of course you can't train 4 times a day. Right. So that's how things used to be. they're a little bit different now. Once I incorporated MMA, as well as I got, at that point in time, I was 26 years old. By no means do I think that's old. Okay. But I had already had at age 26, an 11-year athletic career, which does damage to your body. So I'm not saying I was old, but I was beaten up, So as I started to get into MMA, my body was starting to take less and less of an ability to do multiple training sessions per day, even in moderation, because certain parts of my body could only take so much before, like, the next day I'm going to have to take a day off now because I just physically have stressed that muscle group out too much, or I pulled something, or whatever the case may be. So I've had to change things over the years because my body has changed, as well as now I had to add these other practices in for mixed martial arts. So now, for the most part, I'm doing one jiu-jitsu session and one mixed martial arts session. The jiu-jitsu session has about an hour and a half of drilling at the very least. And then we do our live sparring for, 40 minutes, something like that. Right. And then the MMA session is like, drilling for probably 45 minutes to an hour. And then we do different things. So sometimes it'll be like, we just do 3 rounds of sparring. And then other days we do some rounds of limited sparring. So it'll be jab sparring from Aiatsu or Kenkiatsu. That's how we say open and close stance, by the way. Okay. Sorry. John loves his Japanese words. So we'll do jab sparring from there. We'll do, one guy can throw punches, the other guy throws kicks, different little combat games that make it so that the sparring is not going to get 100% like a fight, but also you practice new skills, right? It's almost like positional sparring would be in jiu-jitsu, where you start from side control or from mount. We do a lot of that, by the way, in jiu-jitsu. We'd start from different positions, because it kind of leads to that thing that I was talking to you about before, about putting yourself in bad positions. Some athletes will never do that. Even I like to do that. Some athletes will never do that. So if you don't do a dedicated mount round, what you'll find is you'll have purple belt students. This happened to me in my gym once. You have purple belt students, or somebody I was thinking of promoting to purple belt, and I'm watching him train with this other dude who's not that good, and he's mounted, and he literally, it's clear he has no idea how to get out of mount. And it's like, dude, it's not like we didn't do class and he didn't learn how to get out of mount. He knows. It's just he doesn't practice it ever, because he never lets himself get mounted. So, it's one of those things that I think is important, is doing those kind of positional drills. And I think the same thing.
Promoted.
He was eventually promoted. Yeah. He learned how to get out of mount. But eventually, you do those. I think those positional drills for MMA are important too. Maybe you don't use your jab enough, so the jab sparring's becomes a good thing, or you're getting a little too overzealous with power punching, so you learn in jab sparring to really move and pick your shots a little bit more, or maybe you add the kicks in. Whatever, it gives you a different goal to work on, that makes it a little bit better. Clinch, we do dedicated clinch sparring sometimes with knees and elbows and things too. So now we're mixing in some skills. One of the things about a clinch sparring, for example, it's how often when you're doing your sparring, I don't know, everybody can answer this question that does MMA. Do you really end up in a clinch naturally and you stay there? It's usually you punch, eventually you get into a clinch. All right, we throw a knee or two and then we separate, right? You're not spending that much time there. So when you get there in a fight, it's well, if you're not doing dedicated sparring from a clinch, how good are you really going to be there? You're only there for 2 seconds out of, every sparring exchange that you have. Same thing with wall wrestling and these sorts of things. It's all right, well, how often are we going to be pinned up against the fence? So we do dedicated wall wrestling sessions and things like that. But I think that one of the questions that, despite that it's kind of an open-ended thing about my training and sparring, one of the questions and that most people have, and I'm sure that person that wrote that question has, is especially for MMA about sparring, is, well, how often are you able to live spar? We live spar pretty much every day. Maybe we take 1 day a week off. And the sparring that we're doing is much more controlled and relaxed. It's not I'm trying to kill you kind of sparring. We're doing it with 16-ounce gloves most of the time. We're throwing real punches, but it's not with the intention of trying to knock anybody out. So you get the feel of punches getting thrown at your face with, not amazing intentions, and you move your head and you slip and you punch and you try to time your takedowns and things. And I think it's important to have live sparring often, man. I think the reason people shy away from it is they just don't have either don't have good training partners, or they're a terrible training partner themselves, so they can't get good training partners, or they have a terrible training environment. And so everybody that's in their gym, they can't trust anybody. And every time they spar, they know somebody's going to come in and try to take their head off. So they go, all right, well, I'm only going to spar once a week. I'm only going to spar twice a week. And you know what? Maybe similar to what happened with me in jiu-jitsu and how I've limited my training sessions and stuff. Maybe one day down the road, if I'm a little bit more beat up, or I feel like I've taken too much damage in fights and stuff, I'll change my mind, and we'll change that. But for the time being, especially because I'm so early in my career, man, I think I need that. I think that's what's allowed me to make so much progress in such a short period of time. I think that's what lets most people in jiu-jitsu progress so quickly too, is that live training element. It's like, okay, we can do this every day. We can practice, every day. I think it's hard sometimes when you don't really have a practical component, that you can practice like full speed. So that's what we try to do. We try to bring the same methodology that we did to jiu-jitsu into mixed martial arts. And I think it's working pretty well so far. I feel pretty good. Let me put it to you this way. I don't come home like with headaches and stuff like that. And I feel like, wobbled and things. Every so often you have a sparring session, somebody accidentally knees you or something like that, where it's, something bad happens, and then you take a couple days off, something. But for the most part, man, like I feel very healthy doing things that way. And the Thais do it that way too. They spar every day, just very light and playful. And that's kind of what we try to do.
Yeah. Do you think that when you're sparring, your MMA sparring is playful and light sparrings? Do you think that you also get to have that hard sparring when you do the jiu-jitsu sparrings, because you can go harder in jiu-jitsu? So you think that is enough for the hard sparrings, and then when you add kicks and punches, you tend to take it a little bit easier or lighter?
Yeah, I think that hard sparring kind of happens naturally. Also, like every so often, you're going to be sparring with somebody. Like if we're going to have the general rule of thumb that we're going to try to keep things a little bit more toned down, every so often somebody's going to throw in a punch or a kick that's a little harder, and then the other guy is going to feel like he has to do the same thing. And hard sparring will come. Don't worry. I don't need to ask for it. I don't need to plan out like, hey, today we're going to try to take each other's head off. Like, it's going to happen like one or two sparring sessions or so every once in a while. And I do think that's important. I don't think you could just play like a little, pillow touch sparring every single day and never have a day where somebody's like has bad intentions. I've had those days. I think they're important. As for how often that should happen, I definitely don't think that should be happening more than once a week. I think that's like, it's a lot. If you're having people winging punches and kicks at your head hard more than like once a week, twice a week tops, honestly, that's, I think, pushing it. I think that by the end of this, when you're in your 40s or whatever, or maybe a little bit later, you're probably not going to be as good for it in the head. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. And you can go a little bit harder when both of the guys are like on a higher level. I can't remember who it was. Like, it was yesterday or day before that in Facebook or Instagram. Somebody wrote that there has been, I think it was John even said that there has been much more injuries happened with white belts with good intentions than black belts with bad intentions.
Yes.
So
it's a great quote, I think.
I think it was John, but I'm not 100% sure. So if it was somebody else, I'm sorry that I messed up, but it was a great quote. So like, if both of you are higher level, you can go pretty hard and still be safe.
Yeah.
And now that you are mainly settled in Puerto Rico right now, like you're mainly in Puerto Rico, but then you travel back to Jersey because you have the school there. How do you divide your time between Puerto Rico and America and New Jersey? Puerto Rico is, ladies and gentlemen, is part of the United States of America. So how do you part your time with Puerto Rico and New Jersey?
It's so tricky. Like with that what you just said, I wouldn't say I make that mistake all the time, but when you're speaking about Puerto Rico and you're speaking about the United States, see it's part of the United States. I feel weird because I don't want anybody to think I'm stupid enough to not know, like, because it's one thing for somebody from another country to not know that, but if you live in the US and you don't know that Puerto Rico is part of the US, it's probably not good unless you're like 8 years old. Like, you should know by the time you're an adult. But even though maybe our president wasn't so sure. But every time you go to speak about it, it's tricky because it's like, oh, where do you live? I live in the United States. Well, the mainland United States, so it's tricky, like making sure that people don't think I'm stupid, but at the same time explaining where I'm at. But as far as splitting the time, so it's just brand new to me. I mean, I just moved there 2 months ago. So right now I'm basically traveling back once a month. I think when it was like the holidays, I came back for like a week, or maybe like 5 days or something. I don't know. And then this time I came back for like 4 days. So, it's about the amount of time that I'm coming back. I have one of my guys, Chris Sodbanow, who has been with me for a long time, basically a little bit after I took ownership of the school. And he's pretty much running the school for me now. We're actually rebranding. I haven't posted anything about it yet, but it's going to be called Garry Tonon Jiu-Jitsu now. It was Brunswick Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a long time. And I just think it's important to have the promotional element behind it, especially with all the COVID stuff happening now. I know my name is going to bring more people through the door. So, yeah, I mean, he's been doing a great job with it. Students are still coming in. Everybody's, still trying to train jiu-jitsu. And at the end of the day, like, one person shouldn't be the determining factor. Like, if you're running a good gym, one person shouldn't be the determining factor in whether or not like everybody's having a good training experience, especially if you have been doing it for a number of years. You should have other guys that have trained underneath you and, know how to run classes and know how to help everybody out. And like, if I was the only person of worth at my academy, like how good of a teacher would I be? Right. Like, So I think there's a ton of guys that I've been training for years that are now, one of the cool things about it is they now get to take on these positions of responsibility that they maybe didn't have before. Because, man, when I first started with the school, I was 7 days a week, teaching every class. Like, I wouldn't even take a day off. Then eventually Gordon started teaching on Mondays, and now I got like 1 day off from teaching. So I would train all morning, then come to my school, teach kids class, basic class, intermediate class, train live, sometimes go to Rutgers University and then go teach those kids. And it was a mess, but I loved it. This was what I wanted to do. And I felt like by doing that amount of work, it was going to help my career and help me get better at what I was doing. And, so I loved it, but, I'm at a different page in my career now. I'm focused on MMA, and that's what I gotta do. And I gotta maintain the high level of skill in jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts that our team has been working on, and contribute to that. And that's part of what my passion is in this martial art too. So, when they decided that they were going to move, I wanted to come with them and continue to work on this thing that we got going on. And it sucks, that I had to leave, some of the people that, that I love and care about at my school. But like I said, now there's all these new opportunities for these people to step up and take responsibility for teaching different classes and becoming instructors and becoming leaders themselves. And that's one of the things I think that, it's hard to grow into a great teacher without having that responsibility, So I think if any, on some level, it's going to benefit the school in the long run, so long as everybody, it looks at it the right way and still, respects the training environment and everything like that. I think we set a pretty good atmosphere. So everything's been going pretty good, man. I'm sure a lot of people miss me and I miss them. But I'm going to keep coming back, teaching the stuff that we've been working on and communicating with the guys and trying to stay in touch as much as I can. And, who knows what's going to happen with this. I consider this whole Puerto Rico thing an experiment. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. So
especially now that you are focusing on your MMA career and you kind of like, you are heading towards the title fight and there's big things that you want to accomplish in MMA, you have to kind of be a little bit of selfish to focus on your career. And that might be one of the good moves, because if you would live still in New Jersey, it would be hard for you to focus 100% in your career, because you also have the gym that you love to do and love to run the gym. But this, like you said, good experience and good experiment for you.
Yeah.
I think so too. A lot of people also were asking about you guys are opening the gym in Puerto Rico. When is that going to happen? And that has been talked about in many places, that you welcome visitors there, but people want to know all the facts.
Yeah.
Like
so
in beforehand. But how far along are you in opening the gym?
Yeah, so they've been negotiating for, a couple different spots, and they had settled on a spot, and then there was some trouble. I will say this, that Puerto Rico operates on a little bit of a different wavelength than perhaps New York City. I think things get done a little bit slower over there, and it's just it's different. It's a different pace that everybody's operating at. And I've met some really great people down there from Puerto Rico that are awesome and very much operating on a high level of, output and things like that. But I've also had a lot of experiences where, you ask somebody to meet you at 9 a.m. and they don't show up till 1 p.m., So, I mean, I think we all have people like that in our lives, but that's kind of I would say it's more common out there that sort of thing happens within businesses and things. So I think it's been a little frustrating, kind of negotiating and working with these different people, because I don't know, for people that have never done it before, to try to start a business is a lot more than maybe people would realize. And I'm not even just talking about monetarily. I mean, you're talking about signing leases and hiring lawyers and getting permits and doing all these things. It takes such a long time. So based off of what's been happening recently, if all goes well, I could see us having a gym in 3 months, 4 months. More realistically, I think if I'm taking more into account the general pace of which things have been happening elsewhere, I would say more realistically, maybe it takes like 6 months. It's hard to say. But I mean, we're trying to push it along. We're trying to get it going. I do think we will eventually have a gym out there where we're training and stuff. And I'm very excited when we do. We've already bought a lot of the things. Like, we have mats, we have a cage that we're going to put in and all this stuff. So, it's going to be a great spot to train. And I think it's going to be, like you said, like a destination where a lot of people are interested in coming and visiting. It may end up becoming like a vacation kind of thing that people, oh man, we're going to go take a little jiu-jitsu vacation. We'll go to Puerto Rico and spend some time with the DDS and take some classes there, but we'll, go visit some waterfalls and stuff in Puerto Rico, whatever they're going to do. Yeah. So, so that'll be cool, man. I think we'll have a little setup like that. And then we'll obviously have our competition team always getting ready for stuff out there. One of the coolest things about it, I will say, is that all of the team lives so close to each other now. So before, even though I'm in New Jersey, Gordon's in New Jersey, well, there were some guys in New York. It's like, man, for us to like hang out outside of practice was just kind of not going to happen. Like, we're all so busy with our training schedules and stuff and have so little free time that like, we're only going to see each other at training and competitions. And that's pretty much it. But now we're in an environment where like most of us live within 5 minutes of each other, some in the same apartment complexes and stuff. So it's been a little bit easier to maintain and build relationships and maintain a certain level of communication between different athletes and training partners and stuff, which has been really cool. So it makes the unit of the team feel a little bit closer than it ever has been, because we're just able to interact with each other in a different way. It's like if you were only able to see somebody at work, but now you're also able to see them, in a I guess like a friendly setting or something like that. Some people might not want that depending upon where they work, but I like all the people that I train with. So I'm happy for it.
Who's eventually going to be like running the school or the gym in there? Is you all going to kind of like co-partner it, or is it just going to be few people who's going to?
If I told you that we've had conversations about this, I would be lying. I don't know. John sometimes has very well thought out plans for things that he just hasn't shared with other people, maybe just because they haven't asked. It's very possible that he already knows exactly how he wants to do things. We really haven't had unless I'm misremembering, I don't think we've had too many lengthy discussions about it. I'm more than happy to take on whatever responsibilities necessary in the school. I don't know if John plans to try to teach almost every class. I'll tell you for damn sure he ain't teaching a kids program. I know that. There would be many dead children. So there's no way that's happening. So I'm sure we're going to have somebody else at the bare minimum do that.
John is going to give children knives instead of stripes in the class.
Exactly. It'll be a disaster. So I think he'll probably spearhead like the elite level competition team. And I'm guessing there'll be some opportunities for different guys to teach maybe some of the basic classes and kids classes and things like that. And maybe we'll rotate, you know what I mean? Maybe some days if John's not there, me or Gordon will pick up or Craig or pick up the pace. I'm not really sure what the plan is with that. I'm game for anything. The way that I see it is previously we were doing everything out of Henzo's. I mean, all I had to do was show up and train, and I was there, and then I was teaching at my school. I can't imagine this situation being that much different. I'm going to train, teach a little bit, whatever, and if anything, it should be easier because it's all the gym that we're looking to build is going to be within 5 minutes of where we live. So, that's also very convenient.
It's going to make things a little bit more easier than to drive from Jersey to the city.
Oh yeah. A lot less money in many ways too. I mean, it's probably a lot to move, but once we're here, cost of living is a little cheaper and stuff. So
that's going to be awesome, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited, man.
Yeah, I hope somebody's going to organize an ADCC trials there one day, and I can be there too.
There we go.
If we just knew somebody who organizes the trials, then it would be maybe
that knew something about Puerto Rico.
Yes. You started with Tom DeBlas, and then when you kind of went professionally competing in grappling, especially now with MMA, you've been training mainly with John Danaher.
Yeah.
Those guys are a little bit different as in their mentality wise or in their jiu-jitsu wise. How do you see the importance of both gentlemen as your coaches in your career?
Sure. So, it just kind of like everything that you just described just kind of happened. It was never really intentional, per se. Basically, like I went to college sometime around brown belt, and I was no longer really too close to Tom. I was pretty far away. We're talking like an hour 45, maybe, or maybe it was a little less than that. Maybe it was like an hour and a half, but we're pretty far away to the point. And I was taking college classes, so it was hard for me to really travel that distance and consistently make training. And Tom really, at the time, I think now he does like some morning and afternoon stuff. But at the time, there wasn't really any opportunity to train in the morning and the afternoon. And most of my classes for school were at night. So that's what I was looking for, morning and afternoon training. So I kind of like, once I went to college, I was training a little bit at Ricardo's, training a little bit in Henzo's, just going anywhere I could to get that morning afternoon thing going. And at night, I also was teaching like twice a week, at Brunswick, which the school that I eventually owned, but at first was just teaching at. And so then I started finding myself at Henzo's more. I built a relationship with John, and then I just kind of ended up going that direction. And when I graduated school, I figured I basically was given the opportunity to buy the school that I was teaching at. So it made sense to stay there, in that area. And then that's why I continued my training where I was continuing it. So, man, as far as the differences between the two, there are many differences. They actually get along pretty good, Tom and John, in different ways. Like, I think they have a similar sense of humor at the very least. They're both pretty fucked up, and they laugh at similar things. So, it's cool, man. I think they work well together. I don't think it's a situation. It's great to have that too, because, it's hard sometimes when I like to have both of them come to my fights and things. It's hard sometimes when you have coaches that don't really work well together. And it feels like it's like if you have like a disrupted family unit, it's not it's like, oh man, the parents are fighting while I'm trying to fucking get something done. And it adds an element to it. So I'm glad that they're in good spirit and they talk and communicate with each other, I think, on a pretty regular basis. But yeah, man, growing up like with Tom, like it was exactly that. Like I came to Tom at like 15 years old. So I was just at a very different stage in life that meeting Tom than when I met John and really started to talk to John. When I started working with John, maybe when I was closer to like 21 or something like that, when I started to get more, I would say I started to get more consistent training with John. So I was already like kind of an adult. So it's funny, as the older you get, the less you consider yourself an adult, even as you get older, which is weird. But so, I look back at 21, I'm like, no, you were a little baby. What are you talking about? But yeah. So when I met Tom, like he basically became the father figure for me. My dad wasn't really around that much. Didn't really contribute too much in like a lot of like real, like serious aspects. Like I'd see my dad every other weekend and we kind of like hang out and go do some shit on the boardwalk or something. Like there wasn't a whole lot of parenting involved. Let's put it that way, So Tom became, the person that I looked up to, the person that like, I saw him do something one way or carry himself a certain way. And it's like, oh man, like this is a successful, like good dude who's got his shit together, who's looking out for other people and doing big things. It's like, okay, like I want to follow this path, maybe not be him, as we know, I'm a very, very different person, but he kind of really helped, I would say, cultivate a successful mentality for me about the sport, because I don't think I really had any guidance as far as like how to dedicate myself to something and get good at it and stick with it and, have that pay off dividends in the future, kind of suffering and sacrificing and all these things. I don't know if I ever really had an amazing example of that. Most of the, my mother was great. She was nice. She's a very sweet woman and very compassionate. And I've gotten things like that from her. But she just kind of got a job working at Children's Specialized Hospital, which is great. And she does great work there, but it's not like she was an Olympian. You know what I mean? It's not like she was trying to become a world champion. There was nobody in my family, man or woman, that had ever really, to me, tried even to approach excellence in something, and I don't mean that as a knock. Like that's just not what everybody does. It is what it is. Some people, they just, they're happy with whatever they're happy with. No problem. But Tom really showed me what that means and how that could, pay off in the future and how that could be a lifestyle that I might be interested. Hey, like, do I want to just kind of do the same thing? Do I want to just kind of go to college, get a job and that's it. And that's a wrap? Or like, hey, dude, you're kind of good at this thing. Like you have a future in this if you really pursue it and you really put a lot of time and effort into it. So I thank Tom a lot for kind of guiding me in that way. And I hold him very much responsible for the kind of work ethic and dedication that I carried throughout my career. Yeah. That was a huge part of his contribution for sure.
Do you think John being his education is to be a special education teacher, which is this is very interesting to me because I also started to study to be a special education teacher this year.
Yeah.
But do you think, because you've been openly talking about you having an ADD or ADHD, do you think that him being a special education teacher who already knew how to handle children with ADD or ADHD had impact in how you developed and how well he was able to guide you in jiu-jitsu and also in your life? Apparently he was a very important part of your life and still is a very important part of your life. But do you think that his kind of education helped in that way? Like he was able to handle you a little bit different than most of the instructors would have been able to?
Sure. I think that all in all, just the fact, whether special education or just education in general, the fact that Tom went to school learn about how to become a teacher. I don't know what that's like. I didn't go to school to become a teacher, but I would imagine that gives him a general edge in, just being in a leadership role and coaching and teaching, because it is a skill, to be able to pass on information to other people. And I think, like, especially with special education, like you had mentioned, one of the things that they would probably go above and beyond with something like that is like, hey, everybody that you're going to meet is going to be a little bit different and have a little bit of different problems. And they might need a little bit more time. You might need to be a little bit more patient. You might need to frame things in a slightly different way than the way that you're framing them, to help them kind of wrap their head around it. Or they may excel in one area and have a deficit in another. So like maybe we use the area that they excel in and to try to propel them in that area where they have a weakness, right? So all these things, I definitely think help, a person. And then obviously, him teaching jiu-jitsu over time, I think he adapted those skills to that. So I'm sure that helped. I think he's ADHD himself, to be honest, if I had to guess. Sure. He's very, just interacting with him, I see a mirror image sometimes in the way that he acts and does certain things. And so, man, I think that's been helpful. I think that the transition over, I think it very much prepared me for what it was like to go train with John too. It's in the sense that, hey, I have a really good work ethic, and like, I'm really going to put a lot of effort, and I'm going to be very serious about this. And now I have this coach who's like, near drill sergeant level, like, approach, who wants to approach excellence here, John, right? It's kind of like everything is, he kind of has this big picture up here in his head, John, and of like how to execute things. And it's like, okay, you're going to move left, right. And then this, that, and the other thing. And no, your other left arm, like you're going to stop fucking it up, that sort of thing. And I was able to survive. And some people are just not able to survive in that environment. Like it is very much an environment of like I said, like approaching excellence. And if you're not approaching excellence or getting damn near perfect, like he's just not happy with it. Right. And some people they can't live with that. Like they hear that criticism and they fucking want to go home. And they're like, I don't need this old bald guy trying to tell me what to do, So it prepared me for that environment. And John just has John added a very different, even though I came to him, like I said, I was an adult, but I was still a kid, being like 21 or so. He cultivated me and my progress in a very different way. There's a little bit more, it was very like philosophical and psychological about how I was going to approach continuing to progress in this martial art, and how I was going to approach getting better from like a very tactical, mechanical perspective. Like, hey, like, yeah, we get it. Like you train hard. Okay, Garry, great. So does anybody else so anybody else that's trying to do this, they're all training hard. I promise. Right. Well, let's try to figure out a way to do something a little bit different than the way that they're doing, or we're going to take that effort and we're going to funnel it into a system that's going to produce results. Right. And learn how to create that system. That's another thing that John did a really excellent job doing, was taking these, like I said, he kind of gives you general principles. John likes to lay out, hey, here's what the puzzle looks like. All right, now go try to put the pieces together. So John does a really good job of kind of structuring your mind so that even if John wasn't there, John dies tomorrow. I hope he doesn't, but I'm just saying, if he dies tomorrow, I think that myself, Gordon, Nikki, and many of the other athletes, we know what the formula is for what's happening there. Like, yeah, he's a very smart guy, and I'm not to take away from anything that he's done, but he's kind of taught us the process. It's like, hey man, here's the principles of jiu-jitsu. You have, a main problem and a secondary problem, and we're going to try to fix that with these three things, which are levers, fulcrums, and direction of force. And you're going to use one of those three elements to fix these problems. And now every problem that we encounter in jiu-jitsu, we have kind of a scientific approach to deal with it. And that just helps in almost everything. It's not just jiu-jitsu. It's like, he's kind of changed all of our brains, and you'll notice it. Like when I'm teaching, or when Nikki's teaching, or when Gordon's teaching, you're like, wow, like I hear like little bits and pieces of like John. And it's because of the way that he explains to us how to communicate details and how to progress in this martial art. So that's one of the cool things that he's given us, is a very logical, calculated approach to getting better at pretty much anything, but this martial art specifically, at martial arts in general. So I'm very, very thankful for that. And it's really allowed me, especially as my body has gotten not as strong as it used to be, has made me feel like, hey man, even though I can't train 5 times a day, balls to the wall, I'm still making progress, and I'm still going to be able to be better than the guy that I'm going to stand in front of that I'm going to have to fight.
Yeah. One of the questions that we had in beforehand is that with your ADHD or ADHD, how has that kind of affected your training, and what kind of means or ways that you have developed that you can focus on your training even with ADD? I also was diagnosed with ADD 2 years ago as an adult. I had that my whole life for sure.
Sure.
But I was diagnosed with that, and I have the ADD medication, which has been helping me with the studies a lot. But how have you been coping with ADD and training at the same time?
Yeah, it's funny. In some ways, I know that for sure that it still fucks with me, even in jiu-jitsu, even though jiu-jitsu is something that I love and I like it, and I would love to pay attention to it. John can show a move 2 times. I can watch it with my eyes, and he's done teaching the move that he's just shown 2 times, fully explaining many details about the move. And I can have a training partner come up to me, be like, hey, you want to do the move first? I'm like, fuck no, I don't fucking know what the fuck just happened. It's like, it's weird, man. Like, it's not that I didn't take anything that just happened. It's like, there's something, I'm thinking about all these other things or whatever, and it just doesn't click. And then like, I see somebody make like one move that's kind of similar to whatever he just showed. I'm like, okay, I get it. I got it. I know what he did there. So often what I have to do is like, John will show the move twice, and then I'll just like hang back. I'll watch a couple other people rep it a little bit. Then I jump into my drilling, so that I know that I really got it down. Because John will, when you make these little mistakes, John's always like, what are you fucking doing, you retard? So I kind of keep my distance a little bit, wait till I see a couple people do the move, and then I jump in when I feel like I'm really confident. So that's one of the things that I do to cope a little bit, is just watch a few extra times. Another thing, so on the positive end of things with ADHD that I think that kind of takes place is I always feel the need to do something else. There's never like, I'm not just content to take this thing that John just taught us and just perform that. Like once I see whatever it is that he just taught us, I'm like, okay, I do it a couple times. As soon as I'm satisfied with the relative result of whatever it is that I'm doing, okay, I got this, right? As soon as I'm satisfied with that, I'm like, okay, where else can we do this? Okay, like what can we tweak about this to make it better? Where else can we apply this? And these are all these questions that just immediately fire into my brain. And I think it has a lot to do with the impulsivity aspect of the ADHD. So it makes me just constantly experiment with all of this information, and I get very obsessive. It's like, okay, like I have to try this from this angle, from top position, from bottom position. And, before you know it, I'm like, hey, John, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And we're building off of each other's technology and information, which is really cool. The other thing I'll say that I think is a positive from it that I think I get is when I'm competing, it's very hard for me to just be happy with whatever it is that I have. Again, like just being able to stay in one spot. So I think it's part of what makes me a more exciting fighter is like, it's hard for me to just pin somebody in side control or mount and just be happy and content with that. It's like, my brain is always like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? So I'm always trying to think about like how I can progress, how I can move to this new position. And in the past, has it hurt me before? Did I lose points because of it or whatever the case? Maybe, but I think it is a big part of what makes me unique and a big part of my brand and what has made me the fighter that I am. And, a lot of there's some scientists that have actually postulated that especially because ADHD is a pretty widespread thing. It's not like it's like 1% of people have it. I think that there's a pretty large number of people that have it. They postulate that it's possible that the kind of warrior subgroup of individuals that would have normally been tasked to do those sorts of jobs probably were the ADHD guys were better suited for that sort of thing, because they're so impulsive and like quick to jump on it. Oh, look, there's a rabbit. Like let's go get it, like whatever it is. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. It sounds cool, so I like to believe it, but
So you kind of just like embrace the idea of like being different and embrace the facts that you do multiple things at the same time and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I struggled with a lot. And it's what's hardest with ADHD, I think, is like social situations and like situations where everybody is expected to do something. When the rules are very rigid for somebody with ADHD, things are tough. It's really tough. You're like, okay, you got to sit down and you got to do this and you got to read at this pace. I remember in classes like, oh, we're going to read together. And I'm not fucking, no way. I'm going to follow along while you guys are reading at that speed when I can just continue. Why would I do that? It doesn't make my brain can't do that. I can't like slow it down, know? So those were the hardest things for me to deal with ADHD. But now also like organization and things like that are a little bit tedious and difficult. Accomplishing tasks sometimes, like lengthy tasks that I know have multiple steps. I get overwhelmed with the idea because I'm like thinking, okay, well then I'm going to have to do this, 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 and this. So I'm like, you know what? We're just going to push this over here and we'll let that adult responsibility hang out over there, whatever it may be. Maybe it's, renewing my license or something, like some bullshit that I got to deal with. I'm like, get away from me. And then I'll just focus on getting punched in the head. But, so it still causes me problems to this day, but I've embraced who I am, like you said, and I think good and bad to it. And I'm just got to learn how to live life with what I got. So.
There was actually a good question that just came to YouTube a while ago. What kind of tools you have used in jiu-jitsu learning? Do you use like mind mapping or something like that? Do you kind of have you ever built like your own game plan on paper, or have you done things like that?
Occasionally when I'm studying, I will, especially if I'm really trying to break down a brand new skill or something that I really want to dissect and I don't think has been explained to me well. I will say this, it's because we have John around. Sometimes it's such a good resource that instead of doing that, I'm just like, oh, well, I'm just going to bring this video to John or talk to John about this thing. And he's probably going to give me a pretty good answer as to like how to do it or what to expect. But there are definitely times where I really break down what I do when I'm studying tape and I'm really trying to figure something out. There's a few different things to look at. Okay. The first is, there are all different aspects of a particular skill that can be performed, usually for, let's just say it's grappling, with each part of the body, right? So I may watch tape and pay attention to what somebody's doing with their legs the first time and just watch their legs and watch that 5 times. And then I pay attention to what's going on with their hands and their elbows or their head position and see like, okay, let's pay close attention to what all these things are. Is there something that's clear that this person is intentionally doing with their head, with their shoulders, with their arms, with their legs, with their midsection, whatever it is. So I kind of break it down because it's hard sometimes when you're just watching tape and you're looking at it as a whole. It's hard to really notice all the little intricate details that a person is doing to make something happen. It's nice to see the whole picture from the outside, but everybody sees that. It's not hard. Like all of us can watch a tape and be like, oh yeah, there's that guillotine. And we can just go wrap somebody's head up, right? Like if you showed a 6-year-old somebody doing a guillotine on a videotape, I'm sure they'd be able to replicate roughly the position, right? But then like to get it precise to the point where you're submitting like a high level athlete, now it's like, where's the wrist position? Where's the elbow? Where's all these things? Those become so important. So that's one thing I do. I'm watching tape repeatedly and I'm kind of looking at each of the different things that I think play a role, right? Another thing that's important. Okay. Let's say I have a particular high level athlete who I'm watching okay? And they're doing something and they're successful with it, but other people are not, okay? So this person does this thing, they do it really well. Everybody else that's doing it, fucking, they don't hit it, or they don't hit it as well, or it's not as good, right? A guillotine's a good example, because there's tons of people that go for guillotines that suck and never finish them. And then there's other people that finish them like all the time, right? So in those instances, what's important is it's like, hey, I got to compare and contrast. What is person A doing that's super successful? What is person B doing that's not successful? Because sometimes by just paying attention to the successful person, it's hard to tell what's actually important. For example, again, using the guillotine, for example, we all talk about different grips with a guillotine, like grabbing the wrist or grabbing palm to palm and all these sorts of things. And for years you hear different, you have to grab like this. You have to grab like this. You have to do this. And what you come to find is that like, there's a ton of different athletes that grab in different ways that are still successful. So it's not really that's not what's critical that makes that move work. Right. So discerning what actually makes the move work is only something that you can do sometimes, in my opinion, by watching the high level guy and the person that doesn't know what they're doing do it, and notice the differences between the two. So that's another thing that I'll try to do. That's a little harder sometimes, because to get, to pull up tape, like, what are you going to do? You're going to type in like failed guillotine. Like you're going to kind of just have to observe, other people trying to do a move. You might even ask somebody to do it and try, like, hey man, try to replicate this, and then videotape them doing it. We used to do that a lot. I used to, like, when me and Gordon we would stay after like training and try to work on like outside heel hooks. I remember one time we were in the gym till like 3 a.m. and he was having a tough time getting it. But his brother, for whatever reason, was just so good at the outside heel hook, like right away. So I would like videotape his brother doing it, and then I would videotape Gordon doing it. And then we try to look like, all right, like, where's your head? Where's your shoulders? Where's your hips? Like, how can we make it more similar to whatever your brother's doing, right? So that it can be successful. Like, so I would say in terms of like development and like learning new skills and like trying to adapt, that's one of the methods that I use. I don't know if there's a name for what I just described really per se, but that's kind of the way that I go about dissecting tape and like trying to learn. When it comes to training, what we kind of do is what I said before is John shows a move. Then we all kind of tinker around with it for the next week or so. He's still showing new moves and we're playing around with these different things. So everybody kind of has an opportunity to play with it. We do it in live training. We do it in drilling. And, all right, Craig comes up with hey, I use this move from here. Or sometimes, this has happened a few times recently, Craig will add something in, and then later on, I'll tell Craig, I'll be like, yo, that thing that you were doing, I'm pretty sure you could do it from here too. And you're really good at that thing. So we're all kind of feeding off one another, each other's developments, and trying to adapt the skills that other people have while also, building upon them. Right. So,
yeah. So kind of like reflecting on your own training and reflecting on your training partner's training as well. That's, sure. I think that's something that people should do more.
Sure.
You also been doing a few DVDs for BJJ Fanatics lately, and people have been asking, when are you going to do the next DVD for BJJ Fanatics, and what is going to be the subject of that DVD?
So I was going to do a new one. I wanted to do it on either half guard or leg locks, but Gordon is doing both of those DVDs soon. And I think he's already
doing a lot of DVDs.
I know. I think he's already filmed like both of it. So I didn't want to try to like bring that out around the same time that he's going to bring those out. So I don't know. So far, the general trend that I've followed with my DVDs is, hey, I want to do something kind of completely different than what other people are doing. The submission escape DVD was kind of revolutionary. Not a lot of people really delved too much in that area. The shoot to kill DVD with this stand up to submissions, there's very few people have really integrated the two. And then the last one that I just did, which was basically like transitions, where you go from one submission series to the next submission series. That was also something that really, you don't really see too many. Maybe somebody will do one aspect of that. They'll do like armbar to triangle or something, like, you'll see one move where they incorporate that, but the whole DVD was centered around like, hey, if I'm in an armbar and I want to navigate to a leg lock, here's how we're going to get there. Right. So, And I did that with just each submission in the systems that we work out of. So I've been trying to think a little bit here and there about some other new territory to go into, or to think about maybe just going into some of the other stuff that I'm just interested in that might be stuff that people have done before. I haven't decided yet if I want to just, because like I said, I was going to do like a half guard or a leg lock thing, and people have done that before. So I don't know. Maybe the answer is I just try to be creative and do something that people haven't really done before again. I don't know, but I don't have definite plans yet. There's a lot of stuff material that I could do. You will see a half guard DVD and a leg lock DVD from me at some point in the future. I'm just probably going to wait until, he releases his first before I go, trying to steal his momentum or thunder. So yeah, man.
That's great. And we are about to enter almost 2 hours already. So let's start calling it a wrap. But there is one question that came in advantage that in advance, right?
Yeah.
That I wanted to say for the last one.
Okay.
And that is, what would you say to the blue belt Garry Tonon if you could talk to him right now?
It's a good question, man. I think, there's so much that has happened. Woof. I don't know if I would give blue belt Garry Tonon advice about jiu-jitsu or advice about life. I'm not really sure. He needed a lot of both. He needed a lot of both. Damn, man. It's hard to look back and say for sure, because you always wish that you could do that. But then it's like, okay, like, what one thing do I think would be most impactful? From a perspective of if I could, I guess from the perspective of if I could tell blue belt Garry Tonon about what was going to be happening in the future, I guess I would probably tell him like, hey man, like, don't worry, dude, this is going to work out. Like, you're going to, like, if you keep going this direction, it's all going to be okay. Cause there was question marks, man, like, I mean, I was pretty confident that I was going to be able to make a living out of all of this, but you never know. So that would be one thing. But from the perspective of actual advice, as if I was just a more experienced person trying to give advice to somebody who's less experienced, that maybe somebody else could use. I guess I would say I would probably encourage myself to study a little bit more. I think that I watched a little bit of tape and things back then, but I just it was great from a work ethic perspective that I just wanted to show up and train all the time. And that was good. But I think I would have benefited from like really sitting down and watching a lot more tape of the guys that were the best in the world. And I think that's like one of those things ADHD wise, that's a little tougher for me too. I can watch tape, like I can do it. It's just hard to do for like long periods of time. It's hard to set aside time in my day that I'm actually going to do it. And then when I actually do sit and do it, it's like, there's something about it that takes effort, even though it's something that you're interested in. I think it would have benefited me, as an athlete. I also think I would have told myself to go to business school instead of studying exercise science. I think that would have been more relevant to me. But yeah, man, I don't know. I wish I had something more profound to share, but that's, I think studying a little bit more and using my head a little bit more instead of just trying to throw my body into the fray all the time, and I think that's probably a wish that many athletes have, because I think that's how most of us start off. We just got a lot of passion, aggression, and, don't know where to put it all. We're like, well, you know what, if I just show up and try to beat the shit out of everybody every day, like I'm probably going to get better at this thing. Right. So I guess that's what I would say.
That's cool. Yeah. Thank you, Garry. We
Thanks,
keep forward on looking your next adventures in the worlds of martial arts and to follow your great Instagram feed as well.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to follow you, is the Instagram best place to follow you, or do you have some other web pages or?
That all depends on how much they like looking at big asses in my story.
So Instagram it is.
Maybe Twitter would be a better place for them since I don't post as many ass pictures there. No, but yeah, pretty much Instagram, just Garry Tonon, I think, for Instagram handle. And I do a little bit of stuff on Twitter. Twitter's more like where I just put random thoughts while I'm sitting on the toilet. And then, my Facebook's also fairly, I just repost and share and probably just talk shit more on Facebook than anything else. So I don't know, different types of social media for different things, but yeah, I'm most active on Instagram for sure. So.
All right. Thank you. And thanks to all the viewers. And I hope you subscribe and like the video and click the bell and whatever people used to have to say in end of each of these videos. Kiitoksia kaikille. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.